What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I try and help you guys keep on top of the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. For those who are watching for the first time, a big part of my job requires that I follow the big macro developments coming out of China. So that's what we discuss on here. And if that is something that you might be interested in, and if you want to be just as informed as my clients, maybe consider subscribing. Everyone else, I hope you guys are doing well. Merry Christmas for this week, you guys. I hope you're having a wonderful break, or the beginnings of a wonderful break, or you'll shortly be having a wonderful break with your family and your friends. Being in China this time of the year, it is a work day on Christmas, unfortunately, and this is the time of the year where I miss my family and my hometown the most. So wherever you guys are, I hope you do get to spend some time with your loved ones, your friends, your family, or whatever. This will be the only China update for this week, and there'll probably only be one next week, but I'm hoping after the new year in January, we'll be going back to 2 episodes a week at least. So hopefully you guys enjoy this one and you find it informative. But let's just jump into the episode. If you enjoy the episode, it's a massive help if you smash the like button. Really, it tells the algorithm that this is real content from a real creator. It's very useful. And also a massive thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys are wonderful. Thank you so much for supporting a new channel. It is very humbling, and I really appreciate the support. Before we jump into the main stories, a couple of minor things. Let's start with the statistic of the week. It didn't really fit into a stories, but I wanted to discuss it here at the beginning of the episode. When Eurasia Group Foundation polled Chinese opinions of the United States in October of 2019, only 17% reported having unfavorable views of the United States. Well, fast forward 12 months, a year later to November 2020, just a few months ago, and a diplomat polled Chinese opinions of the United States again, asking similar questions to the Eurasia Group poll. This time, however, unfavorable views were 77%, with 47% expressing very unfavorable views. It seems, however, that the feeling is mutual. Of course, we covered this in October, but in October, a Pew Research study found that 73% of Americans held either very unfavorable or somewhat unfavorable views of China. So this is the road we've been going down in 2020 in terms of public opinion in the US and China. One more thing before the main stories as well. Ezra Vogel, the internationally renowned expert on Japan and China, who served as a professor at Harvard University since 1964, passed away in Cambridge, Massachusetts on Sunday. He was 90 years old. Whether you agree with him or not on his analysis and his works on Japan and later China, he was indeed a brilliant mind and contributed tremendously to the study of China in the English-speaking world and the West generally. May he rest in peace. Okay, with those out of the way, let's jump into the main stories this week on China Update. The fierce policy debate within economic policy circles in the government in Beijing, which has historically taken place behind closed doors, appears to be bubbling into public sight. To grossly simplify the nature of this debate amongst top economic regulators and key political actors, it comes down to prioritizing economic growth and stability versus prioritizing dealing with debt, imbalances, and inefficiencies in the Chinese economy. An exchange over the weekend is just one illustration of this debate bubbling into the public arena in Beijing. On Sunday, China's ex-finance minister, who served as finance minister between 2013 and 2016, Lou Jiwei, gave a speech critical of the central bank in China, the People's Bank of China, which was very harsh by Beijing technocrat standards. Quote, "According to the current institutional arrangement, the People's Bank of China is responsible for prudent supervision, but it obviously failed to take preventive measures before and after. For example, the reports on the bankruptcy of Baoshang Bank, which was rescued by 170 billion yuan from the Deposit Insurance Fund," end quote. Lau also warned against rapidly growing debt and credit expansion this year and demanded that regulators focus on deleveraging the economy. Quote, "The macro leverage ratio, i.e. debt, should be stabilized and gradually decrease. The investigation and cleaning up of high-risk institutions and the disorder of financial infrastructure must be continued. End quote. The response from the People's Bank of China came the following day, with a People's Bank of China spokesperson writing in the state-run publication affiliated with the central bank. The article hit back against Lou Jiwei, saying that the issues that he identified are not financial market issues and thus not the responsibility of the central bank, but rather, quote, they are a reflection of government intervention and the inadequate reform of local government-owned enterprises. End quote. Actually, many commentators domestically and internationally agree with this point, as do I. Issues discussed by Lou Jiwei stem not from poor market oversight, but rather from politically set growth targets set higher than regular economic performance would reach, which necessitate moral hazard, weak market discipline, unproductive investment, and thus growth in debt at a faster rate than the growth in debt servicing capacity. Also over the weekend, the Central Economic Work Conference concluded on Friday. The event is an annual space to draft China's economic priorities for the coming year. According to a public statement, China's economy will focus on strengthening strategic technological innovation, ensuring the control of supply chains, and boosting domestic demand in 2021. Those of you who have been watching for a few months now will know that these are no surprises. Major policy speeches have been coming out of Beijing from top leadership for months, pointing to these as the priorities of the party going into 2021. The meeting determined that the following key tasks should be prioritized in 2021. They included national strategic scientific and technological strength, industrial chain supply, expanding domestic demand, problems related to arable land, preventing disorderly expansion of capital, which we discussed in last week's episode, problems regarding housing in big cities, and carbon neutrality. Growth rates and the macro health of the economy were also discussed at the meeting. Quote, due to the steep reduction in the base this year, next year's economic growth rate may be higher in terms of the figure, which is mainly a digital phenomenon caused by the base effect. The International Monetary Fund predicted that next year China's economic growth will be 8.2%. The World Bank forecast growth of 7.9%. The OECD forecast growth of 8%. If we look at the average over the 2 years, China's economic growth is expected to be about 5%. Side note here, growth last year was about 6.1%. Economic development is still facing more internal and external uncertainty. Went on to say, quote, next year's macro data may look better, but the micro level may not be so shiny. Many small and medium-sized enterprises experience the impact of the epidemic and still suffering from a serious economic illness, so to speak. Sustained policy support is needed to restore vitality. End quote. And of course, the role of the party is paramount, according to the readout. Quote, as challenges at home and abroad are getting increasingly complex and more intertwined, the thought stresses the need to strengthen the party's centralized and unified leadership over economic work, adhere to the general principle of maintaining stability while making progress. End quote. We also had more economic data on China's economic performance over the weekend. Peking University professor of finance and China economy expert Michael Pettis provided his thoughts on the data, saying, quote, even though total economic activity in 2020 grew by less than half the pace it grew in 2019, total production of steel in 2020 year-to-date was up 5.5% and of pig iron 4.2%. This suggests just how important public sector investment in infrastructure was for the economy this year, probably accounting for more than 100% of overall growth, and why the country's debt to GDP ratio has risen by 25 to 26 points, compared to 6 percentage points last year. Sources tell European media outlets that negotiators for the EU in Beijing have made a breakthrough on access to each other's markets, and a deal may be concluded this week. On Friday, US ambassadors were briefed on the progress in talks for a massive EU-China investment treaty and were told of a, quote, surprisingly good offer from the Chinese side, end quote. It seems that Beijing made a series of last-minute concessions. However, labor issues, and in particular European concerns around the situation in Xinjiang, where there are accusations of forced labor, among other grave concerns, remain a political hurdle to ratification of any agreement. China has so far refused to ratify the International Labour Organization standards on forced labour, as Vietnam has agreed to do with its recent FTA with the EU, which it signed earlier in the year. European media is quoting EU officials who warn that this will make it politically difficult for the European Parliament to vote in its favour. Some commentators have pointed out that Beijing may be pursuing an investment deal with the EU with more urgency than before, as an incoming Biden administration is far more likely to work closely with European allies against China than a Trump administration. Indeed, Europeans likely have more appetite for EU-US cooperation with a Biden White House over a Trump White House. Beijing is likely hoping that getting a major investment treaty concluded will slow, perhaps stop, and maybe even reverse US-EU alignment against the PRC. Well, we will see. And lastly this week, as an increasingly authoritarian one-party state, it can sometimes be very tempting to view the PRC and PRC state actions as that of a monolithic leviathan. And while there is indeed tremendous restrictions on lively public debate in the PRC, we must remember that there are different ideological circles and cliques in elite circles in Beijing, and thorough internal debate about policy directions. I believe that the hardliners, and to a lesser extent the ethno-nationalists and others, have the upper hand over the political moderates and increasingly over the economic liberals too, and that they have been consolidating this position for the last few years now. But there are still some moderates in the government, in the intelligentsia, the business community, and other elite circles. But even now, holding a moderate position in the PRC vis-a-vis China foreign policy, diplomatic style, and the relationship between China and the US invites harsh criticism from state-run media and from public opinion generally. These people are called weak, cancer of the bones, who betray their race and their ancestors, by hardliners. They are not only wrong, but a danger to the people and the state, and, quote, must be eliminated. This is the sort of language mobilized against cosmopolitan moderates in China during the Mao era and in Japan in the 1930s. While there have been many articles in state media this year attacking Chinese scholars and others advocating moderation and engagement with the US domestically, I want to look at one piece from state-run media from last week and over the weekend that I think is quite representative of these attacks coming from more hardline actors. This was written in Chinese for a domestic audience. It's for domestic consumption. It is not for an international audience. As we read this, remember that this is the environment that the last few brave, outspoken moderates in the PRC face when advocating engagement with the US. Quote, "The people who engage in Yankee worship and bend the knee to America praise the United States and disparage China. They believe that the moon of the foreign lands is rounder than that in China, and they do their utmost to denigrate and slander their own motherland. They are happy to weave all kinds of American fantasy or fairy tales and even create and spread rumors. In turn, China's development achievements are not worth mentioning in their eyes. A vigorous, flourishing new era of China, in their view, means nothing. They bow down to the world overlords. Their minds suffer from a soft bone cancer, and they are willing to be a surrender faction in the struggle, losing their self-respect and basic judgment. Some people naively believe that the benefits for security, relying on compromise to seek self-preservation, as long as China does not hit back, does not return the scolding, can be exchanged for peace and quiet. Such an absurd argument, such a ridiculous theory, and without even an ounce of Chinese integrity and courage. Some people are not ashamed, but proud. They boast that they are objective, profound, and insightful. Isn't it absurd? For this kind of fallacy, which reverses right and wrong and is self-defeating, and for those people on their knees who betray their ancestors and aid the tyrants in their own oppression, we must resolutely struggle against them, pierce their painted skin, eliminate their influence, and not let their erroneous values mislead the people." End quote. Okay guys, that's this week of China Update. I hope you guys are doing well. Merry Christmas, happy holidays wherever you are. God, I hope that 2021 is going to be better than this goddamn year. Fingers crossed. Wherever you are, stay safe, stay sane. I'll see you guys next week on China Update.